You've heard whispers, haven't you? Of the red house on Dauphine Street, the one where women vanished like smoke, the one where laughter echoed through velvet halls long after the last breath was drawn. They called it Everhart House, though no one really knew who Everhart was at first. From the outside it was beautiful, 3 stories tall, carved balconies, swan-necked railings, lanterns glowed like hungry eyes in the dusk. Curtains of deep crimson blocked all view, like the house had something to hide. And it did. 92 things, to be exact. The year was 1890. New Orleans pulsed like a fever dream, hot, sweet, and festering. Jazz was rising, bourbon spilled on every corner. Men came to the French Quarter to forget, to sin, to feel alive. And the Everhart Sisters knew exactly how to make them pay for it. They weren't just madams, they were legends. Vivian Everhart, the older one, with eyes like wet coal and skin that never aged. And Clara, quiet, strange, a whisper of a girl who only spoke in riddles. Some said Clara was mute. Others swore they heard her chanting to things that weren't there. But this isn't about rumors. This is about what we know. The house had no mirrors, no clocks, no Bible. And every Thursday at exactly 3:03 a.m. a carriage without horses stopped outside and left carrying no one. Inside, women came for work. They left through the back door in pine boxes, always runaways, according to Vivian. But no one ran from Vivian. You didn't run from someone who already knew your secrets before you whispered them. Some of the girls were last seen smiling. Some were found years later, teeth missing, arms twisted like wax figures. By the time police investigated in 1904, the house was empty. No sisters, no ledgers. Only one note left behind, scratched into a wall behind a sealed fireplace. They take the body last, but first they eat the soul. No one's lived there since. Locals cross the street rather than pass the gates. Tourists snap pictures until they look closer and see a figure watching from the 3rd floor window, always the same one, always smiling. They say the velvet curtains are still warm, as if the house breathes. But you want to know the truth? We haven't even reached the worst part. Before the screams, before the blood soaked the floorboards, there was a ledger. Vivian's list. Neatly bound in red calfskin, no title, no date, just names, hundreds of names, each written in the same precise, inhuman hand. It was not a guest book. It wasn't even a log of the women who worked there. No, this list was something older, something ritual. Every name had a number next to it, not a room number, not a price, just a number, followed by a strange symbol, almost like an astrological glyph but twisted. Scholars would later claim it resembled markings found on pre-Columbian death masks unearthed in Guatemala. But how would a brothel madam in 1890 New Orleans have those symbols, unless she'd learned from someone or something that didn't teach in books? Vivian Everhart didn't come from poverty. She arrived in the city in 1883 with trunks of French lace, opium-stained gloves, and a pet raven named Marceline. Locals assumed she was European nobility in exile. But no one could find a birth certificate, no family, no past. She paid for the house in gold coins, Swiss minted, dated 1741. The deed was signed by a man who died 3 years earlier, and still no one asked questions. Because when Vivian Everhart looked at you, you forgot how to speak. Even the bishop who visited once a week, who begged her to take the holy path, was found drowned in a baptismal font 6 months later. His lungs filled with black water, his tongue missing. As for the girls on the list, they were chosen. Not beautiful, not particularly skilled, but each had one thing in common. They were born under an eclipse, every single one. A detail that Vivian tracked obsessively. Clara would sit for hours with their birth charts, drawing lines, muttering equations in Latin. The girls didn't know what it meant, but after being hired they all complained of the same thing, something moving beneath the floor. One girl, Eliza Moore, wrote to her cousin in Baton Rouge, "There is something wrong here. My dreams are bleeding into the day. I woke up screaming last night and Vivian was standing over me holding my hand like a mother, but I hadn't screamed yet." Eliza disappeared 2 days later. Her name was crossed off the list. The house didn't just collect women, it devoured them in sequence, as if following a map only Vivian could read. And when that list was finally found in 1931, hidden inside a hollowed-out bedpost, only one name remained. The last girl. And she's the reason this story still haunts New Orleans today. Her name was Annalise Ward, 17, from Shreveport. She arrived at the Everhart house in October 1891. No luggage, no chaperone, only a stitched linen bag filled with herbs, rosary beads, and a worn copy of Revelation torn from a family Bible. She hadn't come looking for work. She hadn't come to sell her body. She came because of a dream. Or rather, a series of dreams that started the night her sister hanged herself in the attic. Every dream showed the same thing: a house with red velvet curtains, a mirror that never reflected her face, and a woman with eyes like milk glass whispering, "It's already inside you." She'd never heard of the Everhart Sisters, never seen the house before. But when she stepped off the train in New Orleans and walked straight into Rue Dauphine, her legs moving without command, there it was, exactly as in her dream. Clara was the first to greet her, not with suspicion, but with recognition. She said, "You took your time," as if they'd been waiting for her. That night, Annalise was given room 5, the same room where Eliza Moore had disappeared. The walls still smelled of iron and perfume. The floorboards still groaned in patterns like a heartbeat. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Because the moment she closed her eyes, the walls began whispering, first in voices, then in music, broken calliope tunes like a dying circus. By 3 a.m., the ceiling began to drip. Not water, not rain. Tears. Actual tears, sliding down the plaster, soaking the floor, cold as mercury. And behind them, the sound of women sobbing in unison. She opened the mirror. Yes, opened it, because it wasn't a mirror at all. It was a window. And behind it was a small square room filled with hair. Bundles of human hair tied with red string, arranged in spirals on the floor. Each bundle labeled, each name identical to one from Vivian's list. Annalise turned and saw Lara standing behind her, not angry, not surprised, just sad. And she said one thing: "If you don't leave now, you'll never leave." But Annalise didn't leave, because in the dream she always stayed. And dreams, Vivian once said, were just memories from a past you haven't lived yet. She locked the mirror, shut the door, and prayed for morning. But morning wouldn't come for Annalise, because once you were in the Everhart house, time didn't follow you anymore. You followed it. In 1892, renovations began on the eastern wing of the Everhart house. Officially, it was for expansion. Unofficially, it was to seal off something. But before the bricks went up, a man was let in, Dr. Lawrence Ormond, formerly of the U.S. Army Medical Corps, dismissed in disgrace after a court-martial at Fort Monroe, charges sealed by military order. What we know is this: he wasn't a surgeon anymore. He was a collector, not of bones, not of body parts. He collected responses, pain thresholds, neurological collapse, the time it took for the human soul to leave the body after death. Vivian hired him not as a physician, but as an artist. She gave him the room beneath the stairs, a narrow space that smelled of formalin and sulfur. No windows, no lock on the inside. He brought with him only 3 things: a leather bag of antique surgical tools, a French phonograph that played funeral marches, and a ledger labeled Tests for Willpower. His first patient wasn't a girl. It was a man, an alderman from the 2nd District who'd threatened to shut down the brothel after discovering his daughter worked there. He went in breathing threats. He came out in pieces, boxed in brown paper, and addressed to no one. After that, no one interfered with the Everhart house again. But the real terror came when Dr. Ormond started his second phase: voluntary subjects. Girls chosen by Clara. Not the weak ones, the strong ones, the ones who never cried. They were offered something, a path to greatness, a path to knowledge no man has ever seen. And many said yes, because when you've already died once in life, the pain doesn't scare you. Obscurity does. But they didn't know the tests involved more than blades. Dr. Ormond tested sleep deprivation, sound torture, fear responses using controlled haunting, and, if rumors are true, near-death experiences chemically induced. He said that it was for science. But Vivian once slipped and called it soul tuning. One girl came out speaking Latin. Another, blind in both eyes, claimed to see people's sins as colors. None of them ever recovered. Some wouldn't eat unless the food was served by candlelight. Others forgot their own names, but remembered how they died. Then one day, Ormond vanished. No goodbye. No note. Just blood pooled beneath the door to his room, and no body. They sealed the hallway the next morning, bricked it shut, left the ledger open on the table. Last line written, Subject 27, failed to separate soul from self. Result, subject turned on the observer. No one spoke of him again. But sometimes, on stormy nights, the house still plays funeral music. From behind the wall, he called himself Mr. D. No full name. No questions asked. Only arrived after midnight, always in a black carriage with smoked glass windows and silver handles shaped like serpents biting their own tails. He never touched the girls, never asked for champagne or music. He just wanted to talk. And what he said was not of this world. His voice, raspy, foreign, like dry leaves blown through a crypt, spoke in tongues no one recognized. Not Latin, not Greek, not German. But when he spoke, the walls listened. The candles dimmed, the air grew heavy, and the girls, they changed. Clara noticed it first. The ones who spent time with him developed nosebleeds, sleeplessness, paranoia. One tried to scratch off her own face, screaming, "It's not mine. It's not mine anymore." Another leapt from the attic, shouting in that same unnatural language. The priest who was brought in to bless the house collapsed in the foyer, seizures racking his body as he whispered, "He's still speaking, through them." Vivian wasn't alarmed. She was thrilled. Mr. D was paying 5 times the normal rate just to sit in a dark room and talk. And when the city councilman who tried to investigate went missing, his heart mailed to the coroner's office in a velvet pouch, everyone stopped asking who he was. The Everhart house became his sanctuary. He chose the same girl every time. Inez, a pale, mute orphan from Louisiana. No records, no family. But after 5 visits, Inez began to speak, fluently, in his language. One night, the other girls found her kneeling in the drawing room, drawing complex geometric sigils into the wooden floorboards, symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Vivian simply smiled. She knew what was happening. She called it the awakening. But Clara knew it was something else. She heard Inez whispering to shadows in the hall, saw her feeding raw meat to the irreplace, and once, just once, caught Inez standing outside the sealed wall to Dr. Ormond's chamber whispering, "I'm ready to bring him back." On Mr. D's final visit, he didn't arrive in a carriage. He walked, down the road, alone, barefoot, leaving scorched prints in the gravel. He went into the house and never came out. No trace. No sounds, only a burnt circle on the floor of Inez's room. From that night on, Inez no longer spoke at all, but when she looked at you, you felt like she knew your thoughts before you did. Vivian kept her close, Clara stayed away, and the girls started praying again, but not to God, to whatever Mr. D left behind. The brothel had a basement, but below that, there was something else. A subcellar, bricked off, forgotten by time, hidden behind a wine rack and sealed with iron nails blackened from fire. No one was allowed down there. Vivian called it the ruins. Clara called it the crypt. But to the girls, it was simply the place we don't talk about, until they did. It began with curiosity. 4 of the newer girls, Nora, Esme, Lottie, and Jane, had heard the stories. Strange sounds at night, a heartbeat beneath the floorboards, whispers coming through the furnace vents. They wanted proof. So one night, when Vivian was away in the city and Clara had collapsed from too much laudanum, the girls crept downstairs with a rusted crowbar and a lantern made from a brandy bottle. They smashed through the barrier. The smell hit them first, wet rot, old blood, and something sweet and metallic, like rusted sugar. Inside was a stone staircase spiraling downward, carved not with tools, but with teeth. Every step was marked with names, women's names. Some were familiar. "I saw Lily's name," Esme whispered. "She disappeared last winter." And then Jane, holding the lantern, gasped. The walls weren't walls. They were skinned faces, dried and stitched together with silver wire, forming a grotesque tapestry. Each one wore a permanent smile. They should have run. They didn't. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a room. A pit. Circular. Deep. Filled with bones and rings and rusted corset clasps. And in the center, an altar made of polished femurs, its surface covered in script that moved when stared at too long. Jane reached out to touch it. That's when the screaming started. Not from them, from the walls. Hundreds of whispering voices burst to life, all female, all sobbing and laughing at the same time. The lantern shattered. The girls fled. Only 3 came back. Jane was never found. But for a week after, the Everhart house reeked of perfume and formaldehyde. Vivian said nothing. Clara stood at the stairs and wept. That night, all 3 girls developed identical marks on their arms, black spirals burned into the skin like branding. Lottie tried to cut hers out. She bled to death. Nora went blind. Esme lost her voice. When Clara finally asked Vivian what was down there, she replied calmly, "It's not what's down there that frightens me, it's what we buried inside it." From that day on, the door to the cellar was sealed again, this time with salt, ash, and 7 padlocks. But some nights, if you pressed your ear to the floor, you could still hear Jane laughing. The Everhart sisters were known for their lavish dinner parties, but no one remembered receiving invitations. Politicians, judges, bankers, even priests would find themselves arriving at the brothel's velvet parlor, confused, foggy-eyed, and yet dressed impeccably. They claimed they'd simply felt compelled to come. Vivian called it selective hospitality. Clara preferred the term the summons. What no one knew was this: those dinners were rituals in disguise. The wine, always laced. The music, tuned to ancient frequencies meant to loosen memory. The seating chart, aligned precisely with occult geometry. The sigil of Solomon, the black spiral, and older glyphs never spoken aloud. The centerpiece on every table was always the same, a massive silver dish, empty. Until midnight. That's when the sisters would present the offering. It was never the same. A lock of hair from a virgin drowned in winter. A pair of severed fingers bound with a wedding ring. Once, an entire stillborn calf covered in roses. And once placed at the table, the guests would begin to smile. Always the same kind of smile, glassy-eyed, puppet-like, stretched too wide. They'd begin to eat, though no food was served. Their forks lifted nothing. Their knives cut only air. And yet, blood dripped from their mouths. At the end of each dinner, the guests stood in unison, bowed to the sisters, and left in complete silence. Come morning, none remembered attending. But every single one of them, without exception, signed over land deeds, gave bribes, or passed laws that the Everharts quietly placed before them. But the price of that kind of power, it builds. By the 7th dinner, the walls began to warp. Paintings wept. Mirrors reflected people who weren't there. Servants started speaking in tongues. And the air in the dining hall grew thick, as though something invisible sat at the table. Something hungry. Vivian tried to stop. Clara begged her to continue. Because the truth was, every ritual fed it. The entity buried in the cellar, the reason the brothel was built exactly where it stood. Clara once confessed, "It came long before us, before towns, before maps. The house was just its mouth." And now, with every dinner, every guest, every forgotten night, the mouth opened wider. One night, a judge tore out his own tongue mid-toast. Another guest exploded into moths. But the next week, 12 new clients arrived at the brothel, blind, bleeding, and ready to serve. The dinner table was reset. No one asked questions. Because in the Everhart house, silence was the currency of survival. The Everhart brothel had many locked rooms, but one door, sealed with 7 rusted latches, was known simply as the nursery. No one entered it. No one, except Vivian. Every third night at exactly 3:13 a.m. she would descend the back staircase barefoot, dressed in black silk, carrying a silver pitcher of goat's milk and crushed opium. She would unlock each latch with trembling hands, and behind that final door was a crib. But not just any crib. An iron cage suspended from the ceiling by chains, swaying gently as if rocked by invisible hands. Inside was a baby, or something that once resembled a baby. It never cried. It never opened its eyes. But it breathed, slow, hissing breaths, as if it were learning the art of being alive. Its skin was pale and translucent, veins like threads of mercury beneath the surface. Its limbs were too long. Its mouth was wrong. A jagged slit that stretched from ear to ear, filled with tiny needle-like teeth that clicked even when it slept. Clara refused to speak of it. She called it the thing we borrowed. Borrowed. From where? No one dared ask. But Vivian, she called it our inheritance. Every drop of milk that touched its lips turned black. Every lullaby she sang made the walls of the nursery bleed words, phrases in languages no human tongue could form. One night a new servant, curious, drunk, foolish, broke into the nursery. They found his body the next morning, folded neatly in the dumbwaiter, with his spine arranged like a noose. After that, Clara ordered lead plates bolted across the nursery door, but Vivian protested. "If we starve it," she warned, "it will wake fully and speak." And speaking was something the sisters feared more than death. Because when it had been first brought into the house, swaddled in robes made from stolen priestly vestments, it whispered a single word. A word neither sister had ever heard, yet both understood. A word so ancient it caused all the candles in the house to go out at once. A word Clara later found burned into her diary pages without her ever writing it. And from that moment on, the brothel wasn't a business anymore. It was a womb, feeding something older, darker, hungrier. The baby never aged. It only waited. And each time Vivian entered, its breathing grew louder, as if it recognized her, as if it remembered something. And outside the nursery door, the wallpaper began to peel, in the shape of wings. By the summer of 1883, something had shifted. Girls stopped laughing in the hallways, perfumes soured in the air, and guests, wealthy, powerful men, began vanishing without explanation. At first, no one noticed. A few senators, a traveling bishop, a Dutch prince with a cane of ivory and a heart like ash. They checked in with wide smiles, tipped generously, whispered promises to return, but none were seen again. When the constable came sniffing, Clara offered a tour. The parlor was pristine, the wine cellar untouched, the guest ledger immaculate. But in the walls, behind the velvet wallpaper, were hollow cavities where something had been scraped out with fingernails. Inside those spaces, rats refused to live. Even the mold was afraid. Clara kept her smile wide, eyes warm. Vivian, silent at her side, tapped a nail against her teacup. 3 soft clicks. The constable never returned. Locals began whispering that the Everhart sisters were angels of pleasure and death, that men who visited their brothel left with something missing, a piece of memory, or time, or worse, their reflection. But the truth, the girls weren't vanishing. They were being fed to something. Vivian had begun keeping a journal, detailing every man's final moments, what he said, what he screamed, how he tasted. Yes, they were experimenting. They believed that certain men, especially those of power and bloodline, contained threads of ancestral guilt. Vivian wrote, "Feed guilt to the child. It grows stronger on secrets than it ever could on milk." By autumn, the thing in the iron crib had tripled in size. Its teeth now clicked in patterns like code. Its breath fogged mirrors in shapes resembling human faces it had never seen. And then came the 13 girls. All orphans, all under the age of 12. They were delivered in a covered wagon by a man no one remembered inviting, Clay, for a sign for them anyway. There are things even the dead cannot digest, she told her sister, but innocence is always sweet. Each girl was given a new dress, a new name, and a room upstairs. By the next full moon, all 13 rooms were empty. No screams, no signs of struggle, just hair ribbons in the nursery sink. And on the wall, smeared in what appeared to be blood and something far more ancient than blood, was a single word: more. Room 5 was not the grandest room in the Everhart brothel, nor the most profitable, but it was the only one with a mirror that couldn't be removed. It had been there before the sisters arrived, bolted into the wall with rusted iron screws, its glass warped like water, the frame carved with unfamiliar symbols. Symbols even Vivian, who had studied grimoires in 4 languages, couldn't translate. But she recognized the feeling when she stood before it. The mirror watched. Not reflected. Watched. Late at night, it whispered to Clara in a tongue that made her nose bleed. She would sit before it for hours, bare-skinned, hair pinned up, and listen. Vivian forbade the girls from entering room 5. But one did. Her name was Lillian, a quiet orphan with glassy eyes and a stutter that faded when she hummed hymns. One morning, Clara found her standing naked in front of the mirror, hands pressed flat against the glass. She was mouthing something, over and over. I see me, I see me, I see me. Except her reflection didn't match. The girl in the mirror had different eyes, was smiling when Lillian wasn't. Clara yanked her away. The glass was warm, pulsing like a living thing. That night, the sisters argued. Vivian demanded they destroy the mirror. Clara insisted it was showing them something vital. Some doorway to what she called the root below the skin of this world. When Vivian refused, Clara laughed. You forget who summoned this place. The mirror came for us, not the other way around. Within days, Lillian vanished. No sound, no struggle, only a soft smear across the mirror's glass, like a handprint made from marrow. And that night, room 5 changed. The walls grew damp, as if the room had slipped underwater. Candles refused to stay lit, and no matter how hard they tried, the door would not lock. Vivian covered the mirror with black silk. It peeled its elf off by morning. They soon discovered the mirror was now a passage, not into another room or even another world, but into the truth of each person who entered. It stripped lies like skin, revealed every sin in bone-deep color. Vivian tested it on one of the girls. The child went mad in 13 seconds, tore out her eyes with her own fingernails. The mirror showed her what she would become. Clara, however, stood before it nightly and never flinched. After Lillian vanished, the other girls grew skittish. They whispered to each other, never above a hush, as if the air itself could listen. But the real terror didn't come from the mirror. It came from below. Under the wooden floorboards of the Everhart brothel, something moved. It began with scratching, light, rhythmic, like fingernails tapping in unison. Then came the knocking, at 3:09 a.m. Every night, 1, 2, 3 knocks, always in the exact center of the hallway. Vivian placed her palm on the floor. It was warm and trembling. The sisters peeled back the floorboards with crowbars, only to find a second layer of wood beneath, stained black, ancient, and not made by any craftsman known to them. There were names carved into it. Dozens, no, hundreds. Each name etched with perfect precision, not with a knife, but with something sharper, hungrier. At the center of this secret flooring was a single brass ring, a trapdoor. Vivian hesitated. Clara didn't. She pulled the ring and opened the hatch. What they saw wasn't a cellar. It wasn't a basement. It was a tunnel, carved into stone that wept red. The air reeked of iron, salt, and something older, something buried alive. They descended with oil lamps and silence. The tunnel curved unnaturally, like a serpent coiling inward. At its end was a chamber, circular, covered in dried blood. And there, on the far wall, were 13 skeletons nailed upright. Their bones were small, their skulls childlike. But what chilled them most was the fact that each skull had its jaw broken wide open, as if to scream. Carved above their heads, in Latin, fiat voluntas tua. Let thy will be done. Vivian fell to her knees. Clara simply whispered, they were the first. Before us. The daughters who didn't obey. Vivian couldn't breathe. She recognized one of the names on the wooden beam above, Helena A. Everhart, their mother, and another further down, Vivian M. Everhart, her own. Clara traced the carvings lovingly, almost proudly. It's not a brothel, she said. It never was. She turned to her sister, eyes black in the lantern light. It's a womb, and those who die here are simply reborn beneath. That night, the floorboards sealed themselves, nailed shut, and every knock after that was answered by something that knew their names. By 1891, the Everhart Sisters no longer operated by appointment. They didn't need to. Men came on their own, drawn not by lust, but by something far more ancient. They came with sacrifices. Gold was no longer accepted, nor coin, nor deed, nor title. Only teeth. Human, fresh, pulled from the living. They called him the Collector. A tall, gaunt man with gloves made of child's leather and a burlap sack stained with blood. No one knew where he came from. But he returned every new moon without fail, asking the same thing in a hoarse whisper. Are the daughters still pure? Vivian met him the first time alone. Clara warned her. He's not here for the girls. He's here to weigh the sin. He entered their sitting room, removed his hat, and placed a small white molar on the table. Vivian stared. He smiled, revealing gums torn open, fresh blood pooling where teeth had once lived. Each truth has its cost, he said, and each lie, its offering. He reached into his sack and removed 13 teeth, each pristine, each inscribed with a different symbol. Stars, crosses, sickles, an hourglass, a lamb's eye. Vivian asked him, trembling, "Where are these from?" He placed one on her palm. It burned her skin. "These are from the mouths of those who confessed. Too late." Clara entered, holding the ledger. "You'll want this instead," she said. The collector turned. His eyes were glass, actual glass, like marbles with irises painted on the inside. He took the ledger, ran his fingers across the names, and then sighed in satisfaction. "Still pure," he said. "Still worth remembering." Vivian asked, "What happens if we fall?" His smile turned crooked. "Then your mouths open wide, and your names are removed. From memory." He dropped a final tooth into her hand. This one was her own, pulled years ago in childhood, long forgotten, until now. She collapsed. Visio, bone spinning, blood leaking from her ear. The collector left without another word. Clara crouched beside her. "He's not our enemy," she whispered. "He's the census taker. He counts the worthy." That night, Vivian dreamt of a hall made entirely of teeth. Each one marked with a sin, each one echoing a woman's final scream, and at the far end of the hall a chair, empty, waiting, with her name carved on the seat. By the spring of 1892, the Everhart Sisters weren't just running a brothel, they were keeping a temple. At the heart of the parlor, beneath the creaking chandelier, stood a cabinet none of the girls were allowed to touch, carved from ashwood, sealed in iron bands and marked with Latin phrases burned into the grain. It held the ledger. Not just a record of names, but a living contract, signed not in ink, but in blood. Each client who entered left more than desire behind. He left a piece of his will. The ritual was simple: name, confession. A single drop of blood pressed into the parchment with a brass stylus. What no one understood was that the paper drank it. It absorbed secrets, regret, and most disturbingly, potential. Vivian began to notice patterns. Men who returned too often would fall ill. Men who lied during confession were found hanged by their own belt loops, faces swollen in terror. And those who resisted the ritual, they simply disappeared. No trace. No mention. It was as if they'd been deleted from time. Clara kept meticulous order, not out of obsession, but fear. Once the ledger is full, she warned, it binds itself shut, and that day, our part ends. Vivian wanted out. She begged her sister. We've done enough. Let them burn this place. Clara's eyes darkened. Do you know what happens when a name is struck from the ledger, Viv? She opened a drawer, revealing a finger, pale, cold, with a wedding band still tight around the bone. This was a man who tried to erase himself, but the ledger never forgets. It only collects. That night, Vivian snuck into the parlor. She approached the cabinet. The Latin words seemed to glow beneath the moonlight. She opened the book. The pages flipped violently. Her hair whipped in every direction. And then it stopped. There was her name, Vivian Everhart, marked in deep red. Beneath it, B, rare of regret, keeper of memory. She tried to tear the page. Her hands froze. She couldn't move. A voice whispered from the spine of the book. You signed before you could write. Suddenly she remembered. A blood pact, made in childhood, drawn in crayon and cut palms. Clara had made her promise. This brothel wasn't built in 1880. It was willed into existence by two little girls who wished for a world where no man could lie again. Now they were its prisoners, bound by parchment and guarded by sin. July 5th, 1892. The night the brothel screamed. It began with a drip, thick, black-red. Not from a body, but from the ceiling. Vivian was preparing a new girl named Madeline, fresh from Tennessee, all innocence and terror. But as she reached for the corset drawer, a drip landed on her wrist. She wiped it off. It burned. Another scream echoed from the upstairs hallway, then another, then 9 at once. Clara burst in, her dress soaked to the waist. It's begun. The walls bled. Not metaphor, literal, pulsing blood, thick as molasses, leaking from the floorboards, seeping through keyholes, forming rivers down staircases. One girl tried to run. She slipped. When her head hit the banister, her skull split like wet paper, but no one had time to mourn, because the air began to move. Not wind. Breathing. The building inhaled, groaned, held its breath. And then it exhaled names, all of them. Every man who had ever signed the ledger, their voices echoed through the wood, each moaning a confession they'd once whispered in the dark. I killed her, Clara. Tell no one I watched them hang. My daughter. She was only 6. The weight of those secrets was unbearable. The house twisted under their force. Paint peeled. Floorboards curled. Gas lamps exploded into blue fire. Clara clutched the ledger to her chest. The book is full. Vivian stepped forward. Then we burn it. Clara shook her head. If we destroy the ledger, every name inside is released. That meant 92 women, hundreds of men, all their pain, all their confessions, set loose into the world, unfiltered, unbound, unstoppable. Vivian stood still, blood rising around her ankles. The air reeked of iron rot and something older, ritual. Madeline screamed again. A man stood in the hallway, naked, rotting, bleeding from his eyes. He reached for her, but instead of fleeing, Madeline whispered, Papa? She stepped forward. He vanished. Gone. Only ash left behind. The Everhart sisters understood. The house wasn't killing randomly. It was offering closure. By confrontation. By confession. Vivian looked at Clara. Then we finish it. They gathered the girls, lit candles, recited every name aloud. With each name spoken, a face appeared. Some wept, some screamed, some simply disappeared with the sound of a sigh. By dawn, the bleeding stopped. The walls were clean, but the book remained, still warm, still breathing, waiting, By sunrise, the Everhart house was no longer a brothel. It was a tomb, not of bones, but of secrets. The blood had dried, the walls no longer whispered, but the silence felt louder than screams. Of the 17 girls inside, only 11 remained. Those who were taken weren't killed. They were absolved. One by one, they had faced something impossible. Apparitions of fathers, judges, husbands, preachers, men who had broken them. Some had embraced their ghosts, some had fought them, but every soul vanished after confrontation. Vivian and Clara gathered the survivors in the drawing room. No mirrors, no music, just candlelight and the ledger, now closed but not locked. Clara stood with her back to the hearth. Vivian's hand rested protectively on Madeline's shoulder. "The house is finished," Clara said softly, "but its work isn't done." One girl, Sarah, her voice cracked. "What do you mean?" Vivian stepped forward. "What lived here doesn't die, it moves." A wind blew through the boarded windows, as if to agree. The book pulsed, a faint heartbeat under its leather skin. "We're the keepers now," Clara said. "We've seen the truth, that men hide their sins not in the dark, but in plain sight. In power, in ritual, in money, in respectability. They would not run. They would not bury the past. Instead, they made a pact, a sacred circle of witnesses." Each of the 11 pricked her finger and marked the ledger, not with a name, but with blood. No more clients. No more silence. Only justice. Their weapon, the truth. But whispered in the language of the damned, ritual, exposure, and reckoning. They packed the house with salt, nailed iron above every door, bound the ledger in chains, sealing it inside a locked crate, which they hid beneath the floorboards of the study, a warning carved into the plank above. "Here sleeps the confessions of a city, disturbed. Unless you wish to speak your own." Then they left. No fire, no demolition, only silence, and the legend began. Locals whispered of the house that bled, of the madams who disappeared, of the book that breathed, but no one dared enter again. And the Everhart Sisters? They vanished into rumor. Some say they fled west, carrying copies of the ledger to expose the names of the powerful. Others say they became something more. Priestesses of vengeance traveling from city to city, punishing men who thought their sins would stay buried. But one truth remained undeniable. The Everhart brothel did not die. It simply went quiet. Waiting for the next soul foolish enough to open the book. October 12th, 1933. The Great Depression gripped the nation. In Baltimore, a construction crew was clearing a row of derelict houses on Harrow Street, slated for demolition to make way for a new public hospital. One house stood untouched, numbered 42 Harrow. The city records called it abandoned. No one had owned it for over 40 years. The men didn't want to go inside. Locals said strange things happened there. Tools vanished, scaffolding collapsed, men went mad from dreams, but orders were orders. Foreman Ellis Grant led the charge. Tear it down by morning. They forced the door open. The hinges shrieked like a wounded animal. Inside, the house was unnaturally intact. No dust, no decay. Furniture remained arranged, as if someone might return any second, but it was cold. Not the chill of neglect, but a tomb's breath. One worker, Joel McKinney, stepped into the study. He walked across the hardwood floor, and his boot struck something hollow, a loose plank. Curious, he pried it up, and there it was, a crate, bound in rusted iron and sealed with wax. Atop it, a carved warning. "Here sleeps the confessions of a city. Disturb not, unless you wish to speak your own." They opened it. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, chained shut, soaked in dried wax and salt. The book throbbed with a strange warmth. One man claimed it blinked, like an eye watching. Ellis, ignoring the unease, ordered the book sent to the Baltimore Municipal Archives for review. 3 days later, Ellis was dead, a fall from scaffolding under suspicious circumstances. 2 more workers vanished, and Joel? He locked himself in his room and scrawled hundreds of names on his walls. He was found raving, repeating the same phrase. They fed them to the house, and the house remembered. The ledger never reached the archives. Instead, it disappeared. Official records say it was lost in transit, but the truth is murkier. The city quietly cancelled demolition. House number 42 was boarded up, again. Police placed no trespassing signs. Then they forgot it ever existed. But underground whispers spread about a book that could end careers, destroy legacies, reveal which men once paid for silence. By 1935, strange visitors came at night. Well-dressed men, old families, lawyers. Some say they offered money, others offered blood, but the house never gave the ledger back. And number 42, Harrow. It still stands, hidden behind city files, a dead zone on the map, unseen, untouched, but not empty. Because when something is fed enough pain, it doesn't die. It waits. And the Everhart Sisters, they left more than just a legacy. They left a trap. In the spring of 1936, a professor of American folklore named Harold Whitmore made a discovery that nearly cost him his sanity. He'd been studying mythic brothel lore, ghost stories passed down in southern towns about red houses where women lured, fed, and never let go. Most scholars dismissed them as exaggerated parables from the Gilded Age. But then, a man named Father Lucien, a retired Jesuit priest, gave Whitmore a worn, velvet-wrapped bundle. Inside was a journal, marked only by initials, M.E. Madeline Everhart. Whitmore thought it a forgery. Until he opened the first page. The ink was faded. But the language, it was terrifyingly modern, clinical, obsessed with rituals, sound frequencies, female pain, and transference of consciousness. One line on the second page stopped Whitmore cold. Blood holds memory. Pain stores intention. If you break the body enough times, the soul fragments, and what's left can be harvested. Whitmore, once a skeptic, became obsessed. He cross-referenced old city records. He traced the handwriting to Everhart family letters preserved in the Maryland Historical Society. The match was exact. Then came the most damning page, a sketch. The blueprint of the Everhart brothel, annotated with strange sigils and acoustic notes, frequencies supposedly tested on patients, notes beside each room. Room 3 responds best to violins in minor key. Room 7, patient achieved momentary separation, female, age 22. Basement, successful retrieval, host expired, transfer incomplete. The brothel hadn't just been a place of business, it had been a laboratory. And Madeline Everhart? She wasn't just a madam, she was an engineer of trauma. Whitmore never published his findings. Before he could, his assistant Margaret found him in his study, blind in one eye, bleeding from his ears, whispering nonsense. The women sing to me now, the walls who, and when I sleep. She's not done yet. The journal was gone. Margaret claims it vanished from Whitmore's safe, no sign of a break-in. Years later, a rare book dealer in New Orleans listed a velvet-wrapped 19th-century journal, possibly cultic in nature, in a private auction. It sold in under 5 minutes to a buyer named A. Everhart. No one by that name existed in public records. Not in 1936, not now. But a security guard swore he saw her, dark red dress, pale skin, long black hair, smiling as she walked away with the package. And in his words, her eyes weren't human. They looked like something old, like she'd been waiting and watching. So where is the journal today? Some say it's still out there, whispering, calling, and whoever holds it might not be themselves anymore. What Harold Whitmore didn't know, what perhaps no one outside the inner Everhart circle ever knew, was that beneath the journal he studied lay something far more dangerous. A list. A list so damning it was whispered about in secret Masonic lodges, government basements, and private Vatican files. The final client list. Handwritten in code, protected by bloodstains and pages that had been partially burned, the list held names. Not just of the men who visited the brothel, but the ones who funded it, the ones who built it. Names tied to institutions we still trust today, colleges, banks, law firms. But more disturbingly, secret societies, elite gentlemen's clubs, and theological research institutes. Each name was followed by a symbol, and beside each symbol, a number. Some historians believe the number indicated how many successful extractions had been performed using the rooms, the women, and the pain. The most chilling entry, RC, Omega key achieved, 37 units extracted, male child died, soul reused. For decades, no one could decipher RC. Until 1987, when a retired CIA archivist, Monroe Bellamy, was interviewed by a researcher from Georgetown University. Bellamy confessed that in the early Cold War years, he'd been tasked with investigating paranormal transactions linked to American assets in Eastern Europe. One case involved a diplomat whose daughter was said to speak in voices belonging to 19th-century prostitutes. Another, a senator's wife who claimed her skin was not her own. In both cases, a symbol appeared on their bodies, burned into their skin like a brand. The same symbol found next to RC in the Everhart Journal. Monroe, shaking, told the researcher, RC didn't stand for a name. It was a location. Rosicrucian Compound, the one in Pennsylvania, the one no one talks about. In his words, they weren't just visiting those girls for a pleasure. They were feeding something, extracting something, and keeping it alive. After the interview, Monroe disappeared. The university lost the tapes. The researcher died of a sudden brain hemorrhage at age 27. Today, fragments of the list are rumored to exist in underground archives. One supposedly sits in a vault below a Swiss bank tied to Everhart assets. Another, in a sealed Masonic temple in Rhode Island, only accessible to 33rd degree members. But the most persistent rumor, that someone still updates the list, not by ink, but by ritual, that new names are added, even now. And if you listen closely at 3:03 a.m. near the old brothel's ruins, you'll hear laughter, women laughing. But underneath it, a voice, male, hoarse, saying names. Your name might be next. They always said the basement was locked, but they lied. It was sealed, not with bolts or chains, but with salt, iron filings, and something that looked like dried blood and black wax melted into a crooked star. For decades, no one dared break that seal. Even the city inspectors who demolished the brothel in 1903 left the basement untouched. Their notes simply read, "Subterranean access compromised. Recommend bricking over." But they didn't brick it over. They covered it with gravel, with excuses, and with silence. Until 2001, when a team of real estate developers bought the Everhart land to build high-end condominiums. They were told it was historical soil, once home to a women's retreat center. The contractors laughed when they found the seal. They didn't laugh after it was broken. At exactly 11:47 p.m. on June 13th, the jackhammer tore through the iron star wax, and what came out wasn't air. It was a wind that hummed, like a woman humming a lullaby. But the notes were out of tune, bent, crooked. 3 workers vomited, 1 passed out. Inside the basement, steps, not down but sideways, as if the architecture itself was rejecting gravity, spiraling not into earth, but into something beneath it. The walls were moist, lined with mirrors warped like melted glass, and scrawled along every surface, names, women's names, children's names. Some were crossed out, some were followed by phrases in Latin, German, and a dialect no linguist has ever identified. Then the doors began appearing, old wooden ones, some barely hanging by hinges. One opened by itself. Inside, a room with no corners, a crib in the center, and what sounded like a heartbeat coming from it, a heartbeat that sped up as the men got closer. One worker screamed and ran out. He never spoke again, diagnosed with sudden onset psychogenic aphasia. The 2 others, found later in their moat. One drowned in the bathtub, the other had carved a message into his chest before dying. "It's her basement, not ours. She's still there." After that, the development was cancelled. The site is still for sale today. Cheap. But here's the thing. No matter how many times they cover that entrance with concrete, gravel, or even holy water, the seal reforms. Different every time, but always the same purpose. Keep something in. Or maybe, keep you out. If you stand above that spot at night and put your ear to the ground, you'll hear breathing. Not yours, not human. And every so often, a knock from beneath the earth. You thought the horror ended when the Everhart Sisters vanished, didn't you? You thought the brothel's collapse, the sealed basement, the whispers in the ground were all part of a bygone era. But evil doesn't vanish. It evolves. It updates. It uploads. See, what most don't know is this. The Everhart Sisters weren't just murderers. They weren't just torturers. They were conductors, channelers of something ancient. A force older than faith that fed on fear, obedience, and silence. And that force? It didn't die when their bodies did. It traveled. Through the photographs left behind. Through the stories whispered at kitchen tables. Through the names carved into stone and digital archives. Through you, watching this now. You want proof? In 2021, a deep web forum emerged. Its name, Madams 9494, the suspected number of victims before the fire. The forum was private, invite only. Inside, ritual scripts, vintage photos of brothel interiors not publicly released, voice recordings, female, melodic, hypnotic, reciting passages in the same language found in the basement. People claimed it was ARG, a horror game. But then, people began disappearing. Digital footprints erased, bank accounts frozen. Final messages sent to friends reading, "She's showing me everything. I don't want to come back." The location of the forum's servers, a private network traced back to a server farm built exactly where the Everhart brothel once stood. Coincidence? Or did something crawl out of that sealed basement and into the wires? Because that's the thing about rituals, they adapt. No more incense, no more candles. Now it's screens, subwoofers, haptic pulses. They don't need to open a door anymore. They just need your attention. Every scroll, every click, every whisper you replay at night thinking it's a dream. It's her. They say there's a video, only 17 seconds long. Uploads home. Dead once every year on June 13th. Black screen. Barely audible hum. A name flashes in the corner. Sometimes it's yours. Those who watch it, they either go silent or they go missing. One Redditor found a copy and tried to post it. His comment history is still there. Final words? "She just smiled at me. She's so much older now." Now listen closely. If you felt a cold rush reading this, if your screen flickered even once, she knows you know. Turn off your phone. Unplug the modem. Don't say her name aloud, because the brothel is gone. But the sisters, they're streaming now, and the ritual is already inside you.